Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. This next hour is devoted to learning something more, not just about the world of shoes and ships and sealing wax, but about how, what, and why we believe as we do. A time for the open-minded and a time for those willing to question what they think they know or what they may believe, those willing to be uncertain for an hour. I'm Eldon Taylor, and this is Provocative Enlightenment. All right, my partner Ravinder is here in the studio with me and ready to be uncertain for an hour. So, Ravinder, say hello to everyone and tell them how they can chat live and submit questions to the show.
Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be here. And I'm always willing to be uncertain. I think I'm uncertain most of my life, actually. But I can always do with learning some more, and I look forward to doing that. If you have any questions or you want to just add your comments to the show, then we do have a Provocative Enlightenment Radio Facebook page. So simply do a search for Provocative Enlightenment Radio and you will find us, and you'll see the information there on today's guest and where we are chatting. So yes, if there's anything that you want to add to the show, please come on in and add your comments. And then if there's any information that our guest shares with us today, any orals or anything, then that is where we will post it. So yes, do go check out the Provocative Enlightenment Radio Facebook page.
Okay, in this week's Spotlight, I want to focus on the attitudes of helplessness and hope. I'm a strong advocate of animal rights, so it often offends me when I hear of animal studies that inflict pain. That said, there are times when, despite the affront, I feel the information is altogether too tutorial to ignore. The two studies that I'm about to share with you represent just that. Years ago, Martin Seligman demonstrated a condition referred to today as learned helplessness. What Seligman did was to place dogs in cages with floors that were wired to deliver electric shock. Some of the animals in his experiment were unable to escape the shock despite their efforts to run from it. In other words, the entire floor was wired in such a way that no matter where the dog fled to, there was no escape. Once the dog learned they could not escape the shock, they were placed in cages where only part of the floor was wired to deliver shock. However, dogs that had been conditioned to believe there was no escape failed to try. They simply laid down and dealt with the pain. When contrasted to animals that had not been conditioned to believe they were unable to escape the pain, there's a real lesson here. For dogs that had not been so conditioned fled the shock, finding safe areas in the cage where the floor did not deliver shocks, even when they were moved to different cages. So think about that. What kind of thoughts have each of us been conditioned to that may predispose us to give up hope? Now, I want you to contrast this to an experiment conducted by Kurt Richner. In the 50s, Richter conducted experiments with rats. Wild rats are known for their remarkable swimming ability. In this gruesome study, Richner placed the wild rats in jars of water and watched while they drowned in only minutes. He then placed the rats in the water and just before they would have drowned, removed them. He proceeded to dry the rats off and massage them before putting them back in the water. Wild rats treated this way could swim for days before giving up and eventually drowning. Given a little hope, the hope of a rescue, and instead of giving up in minutes, the rats could swim for days. Think about the difference between helplessness and hope now in light of these two studies. It's important to consider another factor when it comes to habits of thinking: hope versus helplessness, or hopelessness, success versus failure, and the like. Your brain is hardwired in such a way that when you make a prediction and it comes true, there is a release of oxytocin in your system. Oxytocin is that feel-good chemical many refer to as the love chemical. In other words, you are rewarded for accurately predicting the outcome of events. So if you think you're going to fail at something, does this reward kick in? Well, the fact is, that's exactly what happens. This reward system is addictive. So every time you predict your own failure, you are rewarded. And this loop creates an addictive pattern. In other words, you can become literally addicted to feelings that are negative about yourself, and the reward system strengthens this addictive loop. Now, I spoke with Dr. Loretta Graziano Bruning about just this in an interview regarding her marvelous book, The Science of Positivity. And she made it very clear that our own expectation of failure absolutely creates a neurochemical reward pattern based on the release of oxytocin. This pattern, one might say, is a negative self-fulfilling prophecy realized, or at least the reward for that negative self-fulfilling prophecy. Think about that for a moment. The less you think of yourself and your abilities, and therefore the positive outcome of your efforts, your ambitions, your goals, the more you are rewarded by neurochemicals for failure. Now, the reward may give momentary pleasure, but is this what you really want? Somehow I don't think so. Those are my thoughts anyway. What are yours, Ravinder?
You know, I find the whole idea of being rewarded for failure just fascinating. You know, it certainly explains why people just do the same things, or why people can talk themselves down, talk themselves out of stuff. You know, what's the point of trying? I only fail anyway. And yeah, I think there's a great deal to be learned from that, and definitely incentives to do something about it, but trying to find, you know, how to get out of that hole can be challenging.
So the pessimist has its own, his own built-in reward system.
Yeah.
That itself ensures the fact that they're right about the world sucks, and then you die.
Yep, and then they just carry on.
And you'll just be a failure on the way in. Okay. Every week I read some of your letters as our way of involving you while paying respect to the very important role you play in making this show successful. Last week our show featured Professor William Ferriolo, and we discussed his book, A Life Worth Living, Meditations on God, Death, and Stoicism. Elizabeth wrote, his book really helped me to understand Stoic philosophy and live a better life. Mary wrote, I love your show and your selection of guests, so informative, thank you. All right, moving on, Mark wrote, I'm a physician and I've been using your products and love them. And Marcia wrote, I have been using your InnerTalk products for several weeks now, and I am blown away by the success I have had. My entire family is using them, and they have all seen amazing results. Thank you for developing this technology. Well, thank you, Marcia. Thank you, all of you, for your letters. That's all the time we're going to take today. But we do love your feedback, so please keep it coming. You can opine by sending me an email at Eldon, that's E-L-D-O-N, at eldontaylor.com, or you can join me on Facebook at Dr. Eldon Taylor, or go to the Provocative Enlightenment Facebook page. Leave your comments there on the show. We do sincerely appreciate your comments and suggestions. Now to today's show, healing with spiritual practices, proven techniques for disorders from addictions and anxiety to cancer and chronic pain. With a special guest, Professor Thomas Plante. Professor Plante has been with us before, but for those of you who weren't able to catch that show, let me tell you a little about him. Thomas G. Plante, Ph.D., is a Jesuit professor of psychology and, by courtesy, religious studies at Santa Clara University. He directs the Applied Spirituality Institute there. He is also an adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University School of Medicine. He has published 23 books, over 200 journal articles, and book chapters, and maintains a private practice in Menlo Park, California. So on that, let's get him in here. Welcome to Provocative Enlightenment, Professor Thomas Plante.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you again, Eldon, and I appreciate your invitation to be on your terrific show.
I love your work. That's why you're back. You are today's spotlight, Professor. What are your thoughts on the importance of hope? And please address it, if you will, or unpack it in light of the role spirituality plays in generating hope.
Well, we certainly need hope terribly. The world seems to, at times, and times like now, seems to be going to hell in a handbasket. There's so much to be concerned about. The pandemic that is going on right now, as well as, economic inequality and political divisiveness and so forth. There's a lot of things to be very discouraged about. And so we certainly need hope. And there's a terrific amount of research that speaks to the benefits of trying to be hopeful, or look at the glass half full rather than half empty. And certainly spirituality plays a big role in that. All of the major religious traditions and spirituality offer tools, if you will, for one's toolbox that help to give them solace, hope, and a path forward that, without being in Pollyanna denial, but can move people forward in a more productive, hopeful, and health-promoting way. And that's what we try to underscore and emphasize.
Okay, I want to get to your book, Professor Plante, but first I have a few questions that are just generally about religion, you and your process in putting the new book together. So to that end, if we may, first let's discuss religion. Religion tends to promote a form of private club. That's a major objection people have. That is, they're often exclusivistic, if we can use that word. In other words, they have the exclusive truth and all other religions are false. This is divisive at its core. So how does this attitude promote faith and or lead to living the claimed virtuous life?
Great question. First off, religion is remarkably complicated. First off, not only are there multiple religions, but there are also multiple variations on the theme of each one. And so, as example, in the Catholic tradition, which is my tradition, there's highly conservative and highly or very liberal progressive. In the Jewish tradition, you have Orthodox Judaism, which is very different than Reformed Judaism. Certainly in the Protestant tradition, you have Southern Baptists that tend to be different than Northern Baptists, or you have Unitarians who are really quite different than the Methodists or the Presbyterians and so forth. So first off, we have to understand that religion is remarkably complicated, and there's a remarkable amount of diversity between traditions and within traditions. The second thing is, yes, in some respects, religion can be very exclusionary, like we have the truth and you don't, but it can also be remarkably welcoming and opening and embracing. And so I think religion often gets a bad rap because we read in the newspapers and about religion at its worst. We usually don't read about religion at its best. And but we have to understand that it's remarkably complicated with a remarkable amount of diversity.
I get that answer, but and I don't mean to stay on it a little bit, but there's a bit of a conflict in my mind that I'm I'm really interested in how you personally resolve. You, regardless of whatever religion a person chooses, with the exception perhaps of Buddhism, religion claims exclusivity. And in that process, they become very dividing. And yet at the same time, they're arguing that, they're very inclusive. And that seems to be a self-contradictory position. How do you personally deal with that?
That's a great, wonderful question. And I think for me, for example, I happen to be from the Roman Catholic tradition, and I teach at a Jesuit university. Santa Clara University is a Jesuit school, and there's 27 Jesuit schools in the United States and about 150 worldwide. And I also, so in addition to being engaged personally as a Catholic and an engaged Catholic, I also happen to be married to a woman we've been together for almost 40 years, who happens to be Jewish, from the Reformed Jewish tradition. And so I belong to both a Jewish synagogue and a Roman Catholic church. And it's kind of funny, we have a son, our son, Zach, who is about to turn 24. And the first line in his college admission essay was, "Not many people can say that there were more Jesuit priests at my bar mitzvah than rabbis," which is true. We had a whole row of Jesuit priests at his bar mitzvah, and so I would say that at least in my personal experience, it's been remarkably open and welcoming. And we have dinners with my wife's cousin is a rabbi, with one of my dearest friends, and my son's godfather, who's a Jesuit priest at at the University of San Francisco, another Jesuit school. And we have just tremendous relationships and conversations and so forth, bringing these traditions together. We've had dinner parties with priests and rabbis and Hindus and Buddhists and atheists, and these conversations are rich, and friendship is very rich and embracing. And so we often say that we need a lot of hospitality and solidarity for the various traditions and people from those traditions to come together and to share similar interests and so forth. Sure, certainly people have different paths, and a good example of this is the famous poet Rumi, who had said that the different traditions are like different paths on a mountain. There's different trails, but if you follow them thoughtfully and to their conclusion, they lead you to a similar place at the top of the mountain. And I think that's a good image to try to keep in mind. That speaks to religion perhaps at its best, not at its worst.
It's a wonderful answer. Your book appears to be designed for mental health professionals. I found it very readable. And so, I recommend it to average people. I've recommended it to a couple of people already, actually more than two. Tell us what prompted you to write the book. Who did you write the book for, and why?
Yeah, sure. So as you had mentioned in the introduction, one of the things that I do at Santa Clara University is I run a group called the Applied Spirituality Institute. And this has been an institute that we've had since around 2002 that speaks to the diversity of spirituality and religion that we've been talking about thus far. There are people in that institute who are clerics, like priests, Catholic priests or whatever. But we have Methodist, Buddhist, agnostics, atheists, and people from a variety of different, spiritual, religious traditions, and we do collaborative projects together. And then I have colleagues through the American Psychological Association's Division 36, which is the Psychology of Religion and Spirituality Division. And we also connect with them, people all over the country and overseas, who've come from all sorts of different traditions and are interested in spirituality and religion based on research and so forth. And so what became clear to us, and what brought us to our interest in working with this particular book, Healing with Spiritual Practices, is that often people are unaware that there's a lot of richness out there in terms of spiritual traditions and so forth around healing. And healing not only mental health issues like anxiety and depression and substance abuse and so forth, but also physical illnesses too, like cancer and chronic pain and cardiovascular disease and so forth. And that we want to use quality, evidence-based, research, um, um, inspired techniques to help people. Not to say that that are spiritual religious. These are things like prayer and meditation and yoga, so forth. And can we use them in a research, evidence-based manner to enhance healing? And so this book was all about that. So our institute has been together for almost 20 years, and we've done a variety of projects together, book projects and other kind of empirical research projects and so forth. And this seemed to be the natural evolution of our institute to come up with a book on healing with spiritual practice.
I found the way you've weaved science and spirituality together to be, compelling. But by way of providing something more concrete for our audience, how about an example of an evidence-based method or treatment for anxiety and depression?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I also, in addition to being a college professor, I also have a small clinical practice as a licensed psychologist here in California. And this is basically what my practice is all about, is trying to help folks use spiritual and religious practices in whatever they are troubled, by. So an example would be, you had mentioned, I believe, things like anxiety and depression. And I have patients in my practice right now, and I have had them over the 30 odd years that I've been in practice, where they are interested in having quality interventions for their anxiety and depression that go beyond just, let's say medication or traditional secular psychotherapy. They want more than that. So, for example, I have a couple of patients in my practice now who benefit from spiritual direction. So they meet with a cleric on a regular basis, in addition to meeting with me, and they try to get what we call spiritual direction or spiritual help in addition to the psychotherapy. So it's sort of a 1-2 punch. In fact, I've got one patient who sees me in the morning, and they see their spiritual director in the same day in the afternoon. So they get a bit of both. Another example is patients who are quite anxious, and yet they feel solaced, they feel consoled when they can attend religious service or go to a faith-sharing group or a meditation group or something like that. Other examples are things like nowadays very popular is a technique is mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindfulness meditation, extremely popular. People seem to really get much out of it. Of course, it comes from the Buddhist tradition, but that doesn't mean it's owned by the Buddhists in any way. In fact, there are other traditions, including the Christian tradition, who have used over the years what's called centering prayer that has a lot of similarities with mindfulness. And I've got patients in my practice right now, for example, who are using that to deal with anxiety and depressive symptoms. So mindfulness is a great technique, but it's not owned by the Buddhists in any way. Mantram training is another good example. Mantram training is repeating a sacred word over and over. And I've got a colleague, one of the members in our team, is a nursing professor in one of the VA hospitals in Southern California, and she uses this with veterans who have HIV and also homeless vets and so forth, and has done empirical research in that regard. So, there's a numerous examples of how spiritual techniques, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, whether it's attending service, whether it's spiritual direction, whether it's mantra training, and so forth, can be integrated in an evidence-based, scientific way for the relief of anxiety, depression, substance abuse issues, and so forth. One maybe last example is, people are very familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous. AA is a very, very popular program, and variations on the theme of AA, such as Narcotics Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous. And if you look at the 12 steps of AA, they're remarkably spiritual and religious in basis. And so that's another kind of popular example of integrating that kind of spiritual element into treatment services.
The book is packed with them. I recommend it to everybody listening. It's a wonderful book, and it's very helpful in many ways. It's time for us to get a commercial in here, so we're speaking with Professor Thomas Plante about his work and book, Healing with Spiritual Practices, Proven Techniques for Disorders from Addiction and Anxiety to Cancer and Chronic Pain. Book's available on Amazon. I'm sure you can find it in your local bookstore. You can learn more about our guest and his books by visiting his website at scu.edu/T-Plante. Plante is spelled Plante. T for Thomas, Plante. scu.edu/T-Plante. Okay, do please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Change has never been easier. Whether you wish to lose weight, stop smoking, build better relationships, become creative, enjoy ultra prosperity, or simply relax and promote self-healing, InnerTalk has been repeatedly demonstrated effective in the most rigorous of scientific studies. Our customers love InnerTalk. Sean wrote, "I have struggled with bulimia for over 30 years and have never been able to lose weight without restoring to it until I used InnerTalk." Vicky wrote, "My hubby has been using the Stop Snoring CD and already his dangerous and raucous snoring levels have stopped." Celeste wrote, "I recently graduated from Taft Law School with honors. I'm writing to tell you how much your InnerTalk CD, Excel in Exams, has helped me. With over 300 titles to choose from, there is something for everyone. Check it out today by going to innertalk.com.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, we're chatting with Professor Thomas Plante about his work and book, Healing with Spiritual Practices, Proven Techniques for Disorders from Addictions and Anxiety to Cancer and Chronic Pain. You can learn more about our guest and his books by visiting his website at SCU, that's Santa Clara University, scu.edu/T-Plante. Okay, every week we ask our guests for their favorite music that has some real meaning to them. As you know by now, music psychology is not just a hobby, avocation of mine, if you will, but it's a field of research with practical relevance in many areas. So, Professor, you chose as your music today Dan Schutz's These Alone Are Enough. Please share with us, why is this music important to you, and how does it inform us about who you are?
Oh, well, the song is very important for me, and Dan's music is very important for me. Dan Schutte is part of a team, what's called the St. Louis Jesuits, who kind of revolutionized liturgical music in the Catholic Church in the 1970s, in the early 70s after Vatican II. Dan's music is just very transformative in my view. He's a personal friend, a dear friend. He now lives in the San Francisco area, and it's been a great pleasure and privilege getting to know Dan and his music over many decades. For many Catholics, particularly those who are influenced by that music, they speak to it as the soundtrack of their life. And These Alone Are Enough, the song that was played, is the very famous prayer of Saint Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits, called the Suspis. And it's the prayer that's always given at, for example, at funerals and things like that, which is I also read and had sung at my mother's funeral 2 years ago. And so it's a meaningful musician, it's a meaningful music, and it's a meaningful prayer. And the purpose of the song is basically to say, at the end of the day, everything that we get, we believe is a gift. Life is a gift. We would say in my tradition, it's a gift from God. And that at the end of the day, we give it all back. That when we leave this world, we hand it all back to God to use as He will.
It's beautifully done, for certain. All right. Well, let's play devil's advocate a bit for a minute. I've interviewed a number of prominent atheists and agnostics. You mentioned earlier that you have, your atheists and your agnostics that attend. So, to the person, they attack religion first on the basis of claims that are either tautological or unscientific. So from the Earth age of 7,000 years to the notion of omnipotence, there are attacks which appeal especially to the younger generation. And when I say that, I'm thinking of Dawkins' work. He seems to be one of their heroes. Decimates traditional religious views with arguments such as, if God is all-powerful, can He build a rock so large He can't lift it? Or if God is all-powerful, why did He create Adam with a deficient will? What do you say to those who attack religion this way?
Great question, Eldon. And it's a very common one. You hear this an awful lot. And, I think very either religious people and very atheist people, I kind of both, can, I think, make the same error, which is a certain degree of kind of, arrogance in believing that they have answers when answers are often hard to come by. And so I think when it comes to these questions, we have to approach with humility. That whether you're a religious person or a non-religious person, that to expect us to have answers for so many questions is really quite difficult, and if not arrogant. And so we approach with humility. And it reminds me of a funny line from one of those old Woody Allen movies where someone was asking him, how could it be that God allowed Nazis and Nazi Germany to unfold and to, all those Jews and others getting killed? And the response was by Woody Allen, in the role that he played, was, how do I know why there were Nazis? I don't even know how the can opener works. And I think that speaks to the humility that we have to approach. So I think people, whether they're religious or not, I think may wish to ask themselves, can they approach some of these questions with sincere, thoughtfulness and humility? And I would say that we treat people. I know you have said in your show today and elsewhere you're interested in the humane treatment of animals and things like that, which is terrific. And I think part of my thinking on this is that we treat everyone, humans as well as animals, with respect, with compassion, with reverence, and a certain degree of humility. And I think this is really important, that we try to avoid arrogance. You mentioned Richard Dawkins and some of the other new atheists like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and so forth. And I've certainly read their work, but I feel like that work comes with a certain degree of, to be honest, some degree of arrogance and not enough humility. And sometimes they take the worst case scenarios of religion and run with that. Some of the wacky things that people sometimes do in the name of religion, as if that represents all religion. And I think a good analogy that everybody could understand would be, let's say, a car. Is a car a good thing or a bad thing? Well, in a lot of ways, we'd probably say a car is a really good thing because the car gets you where you want to go. So that's a really good thing. But in some respects, it's a really bad thing because it can, a gas-powered car can pollute the environment, and in the hands of a drunk driver, or a terrorist, a car could be a weapon and could kill people. So it is a good thing or bad thing. It's both. And if you are a victim of a drunk driver, you might say, well, a car is a terrible thing. Or if you live in a highly polluted area where cars are creating such pollution that it's hard to breathe, then you might say cars are a bad thing. But if you need to be rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, you might say, well, a car is a good thing. And I think the same can be true said for religion.
I like your answer, particularly the contrast humility versus arrogance. But I'm going to flip the coin over and ask it to you a little differently. How much arrogance do you think is involved in deciding that we're going to hang omnibenevolent, omniscient, omnipotent, et cetera, as labels on the creator of all that is?
Yeah, and I guess I would say a very well-known world religion scholar is a fellow named Euston Smith, who you may have heard of. He was quite well known. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. He was kind of deep in his 90s, and he was featured in Bill Moyer's special on world religions. And I've gotten to know Euston over the years. There was a Euston Smith Institute here in Northern California, and we used to have what's called Brunch with Euston on the second Saturday of the month during his final years. And I think he's a very good scholar and thoughtful and a kind and gracious person, and writes beautifully about this. And I think he some of his approach would be that we're all sort of like on this journey trying to understand the world, meaning and purpose in life. Trying to answer questions: what happens when we die? Why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? And we're trying to understand the world. And the religious traditions over the years have tried to give us some structures to answer those very important questions. But we have to kind of respect each other's path and journey, embrace that we're all trying to answer similar kinds of questions. And firm answers are often very hard to come by. So these notions of an omnipotent God and this and that, and a lot of that, it comes out of struggling with these foundational, basic human questions for millennia. And I think another good author who's written quite well about some of these things is another popular author named Karen Armstrong, who's written quite a bit about this. And she talks about in her book, The Great Transformation, about the axial age, or how the major religious traditions of the world emerged. And she kind of concludes that, at the end of the day, compassion is the name of the game. And all of the traditions have had their failings and their atrocities and so forth. No one is spared from moments of arrogance and atrocities and in-group versus out-group fighting and so forth. But at the end of the day, compassion is really where the action is. And I think I would agree with that.
I just kind of think, I guess for me, and that's a great answer, that we would circumvent a whole lot of problems if we just, more or less thought of it maybe like Plotinus. God's the ineffable unknown. So much for that. Some research, professors, suggests that people are actually hardwired to believe in a higher power. Michael Shermer puts us down to what he calls our believing brains. That is, evolution facilitated this, since it makes sense that we become more and more aware. We need aware of ourselves, aware in the sense of conscious. Well, then we need hope to continue in life. and religious beliefs facilitate that. So when we lose a loved one, well, they had to go to some other place. What are your thoughts on the brain being hardwired for religious experience and this whole question of evolution, Professor?
It's a great question, and there's a good amount of research on this topic. This notion of, is there like a God gene, which I believe was called a VMAT, I think it's called, the God gene. Is there somehow we're wired to have religious interests and engagement and so forth? And I would say that, we also have to put this in context and what we would call a biopsychosocial or a biopsychosocial spiritual model or perspective. We do believe, and I'm no neuroscientist or brain scientist, but we do believe that there is research that suggests that there is sort of a genetic or some predisposition towards religiosity and spirituality and so forth. And we believe that there's some evidence for that, but it's not so simple because it's interacting with psychological and social issues as well. How we're raised, what kind of life do we have, and how we try to find meaning and purpose in the world and understand our world. And certainly science has helped us to have a better appreciation for how the world works and so forth in current times compared to thousands of years ago. And so because of that, because of our the primary religious traditions were developed many, many years ago, they're also burdened by the understanding of the time. So a really good example of this speaks to why would the Catholics be sort of discombobulated over things like masturbation and other kind of sexual behavior, abortion, this and that. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but in a simple answer is we have to understand that during the Middle Ages, the understanding of biology at the time was that the fully formed human being was in the semen. So a real complete human being was in the semen that got planted into a female. And so if you think of that in those terms, if that's your understanding of biology, then masturbation is murder. You've just killed somebody. Now we know in the 21st century that of course the fully formed human being is not in the semen, but we have to realize that these religious scriptures and texts that go back thousands of years were written during a particular time and a particular way of understanding the world. And so we have to kind of realize that in order to have a better appreciation for how do we understand these texts in the 21st century.
I think there's altogether too little of that shared in religious circles, or that is at least, when you visit church or you read the Bible, you read the book of Leviticus as a case in point, and a lot of people just get turned off right there, unclean woman and so on and so forth. But this whole idea of accepting what's written in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, I guess, is a record of Yahweh's intercourse with the Jewish people, more as a history subject to translation and context. That's something that I just don't think we hear enough of. Which, please opine on that comment.
I think that's true, and that's why I'm so grateful, to be honest, to be in a Jesuit university like Santa Clara, because we can talk about this stuff all the time. One of the nice things about I think these kind of schools, not just Santa Clara, but other kind of not only Jesuit schools, but other kind of schools that are maybe cut from the same cloth, is that this is very much part of what we talk about, and so that we have to and find resources if we're interested in this stuff, regardless of one's tradition or no tradition, to learn more about what do we really know about these traditions and scripture and things like that. And there's so many fun stories, wonderful writers. For a good example is Bart Ehrman, who's at the University of North Carolina, who writes a variety of popular, and engaging books. Even though as an academic he writes for a general audience too. One of them is called Misquoting Jesus, and it's a terrific book because it shows how errors can take you down the wrong path. So, for example, if you change one letter of one word of the original Greek, that you find that John the Baptist wasn't eating locusts and wild honey in the desert. He was eating pancakes and wild honey in the desert. Well, pancakes make a whole lot more sense than locusts. Or if the ancient Greek word that's used to refer to Jesus' mother Mary could be interpreted as virgin, but it could also equally be interpreted as young mother. Well, that matters. Do you interpret that as virgin, or do you interpret it as young mother? And that word apparently can be interpreted either way. So there's a lot of that that we can unpack, and that another good example is the fourth gospel in the New Testament, the Gospel of John. It's a high Christology gospel. It's very kind of Jesus is very special, and much more so than some of the earlier written gospels. And when they debated and decided what would be canonical, what part of the text would be official and what would not, there was voting, and the Gospel of John got in when the Gospel of Thomas did not. And if you read the Gospel of Thomas, it's like Jesus is Buddha. Jesus comes across as very much a Buddha, but it's a very low Christology, and it matters. So we'd have a vastly different kind of Christianity if you substitute the Gospel of John for the Gospel of Thomas. There's all sorts of things like that. And so I'd encourage your listeners who are interested in this stuff. There's plenty out there. You don't have to be at a Jesuit school to access this. There's wonderful writers. Karen Armstrong, there's Houston Smith, there's Bart Ehrman, there's Jill Levine. I mean, there's Elaine Pagel. I mean, there's so many wonderful scholars who write for a general audience. Who could really learn and expand their mind. And I think if you do, you develop more humility, more compassion than not.
Let's get back to your book. I love your answers. The Rosetta Stone, I think, was I want to say hugely significant, but I was looking for a better word in understanding these things. For our audience, how can people not engaged in religious or spiritual practices benefit from these practices, spiritual practices, those in your book, Professor?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are doing this already. I mean, there's an awful lot of people who would describe themselves as either atheist, agnostic, or what we call the nuns. N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. So the nuns are people that have no real affiliation. And for the most part, they tend to like some of the tools that are offered by spirituality, but without sort of the religious identification. Probably the best example of this is mindfulness. Mindfulness has been sanitized, if you will, secularized, so that people really don't see the Buddhism in it. Another example is yoga. Yoga, of course, comes from the Hindu tradition. It's very much part of that tradition. And yet there are so many people who love and enjoy yoga who are not Hindus at all and have no interest in Hinduism. Another one is music. You had played one of my favorite Dan Schutte songs during the break. And people are very moved by music. So much of the work of Bach and Mozart and so forth was liturgical music, but you don't have to be in a church environment to appreciate that. There's for example, the Ave Maria, beautiful, beautiful song that a lot of people like. And they don't care that it's the Hail Mary prayer set to music. It's just a beautiful song. And so music, mindfulness, yoga, and of course community support. One of the nice things that religious traditions tend to offer is a way to engage in community. And
I'm sorry to cut you off, Professor. We are coming up on a hard time limit. I want to thank you, sir, for your willingness to share with us today. For the book that you've written, it's a great book. I recommend it to everybody. We've come to the end of another episode of Provocative Enlightenment. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our show and will join us again next week, same time and same place. And do tell your friends, let's have them join us as well. Okay, until next time, wherever you are in the world, remember, believing in yourself always matters.
Provocative Enlightenment has been brought to you by Progressive Awareness Research and other sponsors. Provocative Enlightenment is a syndicated show and appears on other networks. For a schedule of show times, visit provocativeenlightenment.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, write to Eldon at eldontaylor.com.